Okay, here we are in chapter number 6. We are talking all about voters, voter behavior, qualifications for voters, and how we try to understand their behaviors. That way you can become a better voter for yourself. So I got a couple of videos again linked in here that I will try to put onto the Canvas page. You can see those to help you understand this concept a little bit better. So we're going to skip over that one to begin with here and jump right into our right to vote. And as we think through the history of American voting rights, it is important to understand that we have had a gradual expansion of our voting rights to where we originally designed the Constitution a particular way. There were a lot of restrictions on who could vote, restrictions based off of your religion, based off of your gender, your age, your property ownership, even your race, and whether or not you paid taxes or not. So therefore, a lot of those things have been eliminated as we look at our qualifications today, but it's important to understand that it's not always been the way that it currently is, that we have to go back and see the progression over time. Most of the states, they have determined voter eligibility throughout the course of American history, and so it's been left up to the states. And there are a few amendments that now have created national laws that the states can't get around. But if it's not mentioned in a national law or in an amendment, then the states have the opportunity to determine those voter rights. But unfortunately, voters choose not to exercise their right. Even though we've expanded the voter pool, we have given more people the opportunity to vote. There are lots of people that choose not to exercise that privilege and opportunity to vote. And so the success of our American form of democracy can only continue as long as we have active participation of our citizens. Once the citizens stop voting, stop participating, then our politicians and our government's going to assume that it's not important to them, and maybe they don't need that privilege to vote, or maybe they're not educated enough to vote. Maybe they don't know enough about the candidates or the process. That's why we're learning through this stuff. We don't want you to be in that category. We want you to help preserve our democratic principles. Now, as we look back through American history, we can see that America has expanded its suffrage. It's expanded its voting rights. It's important to note here that the term suffrage is referencing voting rights when we're talking about government. So we go back to the very beginning, and in the initial Constitution, there were qualifications you had to have in order to vote. It was not for everybody. Even for the white males that we typically think they've always had the privilege to vote. Oh, that was not the case. There were people who could not vote. Even if they were a white male over the age of 21, they could not vote because they did not own property. And so as time progresses, by the time we get to the mid-1800s, this qualification gets dropped off, and most states no longer require you to own property in order to vote. One of the other qualifications was that you had to be a member of a particular church. This qualification drops off early in the 1800s. It does not last very long through our constitutional history, but at this point here, by the time we get to the Civil War, we now have universal white male suffrage. So every white male in the United States who is a citizen who meets the age qualifications can vote. Our next stage is for black male suffrage, and maybe we need to expand this a little bit and talk about all minority groups. So it was primarily targeted toward the freed slaves, but when we look at the extent of the impact of the Civil War and the Civil War amendments, by the time we get to 1870 and we have the 15th Amendment ratified, now we have all minority groups, and it was specifically targeting the black groups. They have the opportunity to vote if they are a male and they are over the age of 21. Unfortunately, there are a lot of states that still were able to keep blacks from voting using Jim Crow laws or using other methods like taxes or discriminatory literacy tests that did not give them their full privileges from the 15th Amendment. Females were finally given the privilege to vote in 1920 as a result of the 19th Amendment. And there are some states that actually did allow women to vote even in the 1860s, prior to blacks getting the right to vote in the 15th Amendment, there were states that allowed females to begin voting. A lot of females had worked in the abolitionist movement and thought that they were going to be included in that 15th Amendment, and when it came out and it was not included, they were extremely upset. And through the turmoil of Reconstruction, this issue it took a back seat to reconstructing the country and did not emerge again until the progressive era in the 19 teens. We then move ahead toward the Civil Rights era, and there were a lot of federal laws and court decisions that happened during this time that helped extend voting rights, helped to recorrect some of the states that had made their own decisions on how they were going to restrict voters. One of the big issues of legislation was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This guaranteed equality in voting. You could not discriminate based off the color of somebody's skin or based off of their property qualifications or based off their education. You now had to make voting equal for all citizens. We also have the creation of the 23rd and 24th Amendment. And if you go back and remember what those were all about, the 23rd gave voting rights to D.C. So Washington, D.C. citizens now had the privilege to be able to vote in a presidential national election. The 24th Amendment was all about poll taxes, which eliminated the requirement that you had to pay taxes before you could go to the polls, or you had to show proof that your taxes were up to date, or that you were forced to pay a tax at the poll. Those were not allowed. And then our fifth and final stage of suffrage is the youth suffrage movement. And this is a direct result of the 26th Amendment that guaranteed the right to vote for 18-year-olds. We moved the age from 21 down to 18, and we now see a whole new group of people who are eligible to vote. My question in class was, what should be the cutoff? Is 18 a fair age? Should we consider moving it back up to 21? Should we allow it to go down to 16? I think there are a lot of good arguments in that conversation, but ultimately right now we have decided 18 is the legal age to become an adult, and so therefore if you are a citizen at the age of 18, you are eligible to vote. This amendment and this movement was a direct result of the draft for Vietnam and brought this about. Now let's talk about some of the voter qualifications. So voters are required to fulfill at least 3 requirements, and they must satisfy these requirements in order to be able to vote. So make sure that you know these minimum requirements. Number 1, you must be a citizen. If you are a foreign resident, if you are not a citizen yet, our government calls you an alien. That is not like the outer space type of alien. That is specifically talking about somebody who is foreign to our country. They're not a native-born citizen. So these people generally are not allowed to vote, but the Constitution is silent on this, and the Constitution does not specify, are they allowed to vote or are they not allowed to vote? Could somebody walk across the border from Canada, move in with me, and then vote in the election? Well, the Constitution is very unclear. So it depends on whether you're a strict interpreter of the Constitution or whether you are a very broad, loose interpreter of the Constitution as to what your answer would be. And imagine the little old lady working at the poll trying to figure out, should I allow this Canadian immigrant to vote without proper identification or without knowing whether or not he is a legal resident? So because of that, because there's nothing in the Constitution that prohibits states from allowing these aliens to vote, a lot of states did allow that to happen. And a lot of states brought in aliens or brought in immigrants to vote, even though they had not been documented properly. Now, you can see there would be a lot of problems with that. And since that time, the federal government has stepped in and has issued a determination on who they qualify as a citizen. And if you're not one of these qualifications, then you are not supposed to be eligible to vote. But it becomes one of those disconnects that we talked about between the federal government and the local municipalities. The federal government may issue a law or may issue a decree and say, these people are supposed to vote, these people are not. But getting that enforced at a local level can be really tricky unless somebody's willing to be the whistleblower or the person is willing to notify the authorities that this is going on. These votes might be cast, and as long as the election committee doesn't catch it, they get counted. So the federal government defines and determines a citizen this way. Either you can be a citizen through birthright. And so there are two types of birthright citizenships, and we go back into the Latin a little bit to understand how you become a birthright citizen. First one is jus soli. Now, jus soli means that you have the right of place. It means that you are born on American soil or American territory. So jus soli is referencing the soil. You turn those letters around, you get soil out of that. And so this means that you are born on American territory, born on American soil. 15th Amendment addresses this. Actually, I take that back. It's 14th Amendment addresses this citizenship issue. And it does talk about if you're born on American soil, then you are an American citizen. It does not say anything about mom and dad. So it is plausible, and many have done this, to where mom and dad sneak across the border. Mom is 8 or 9 months pregnant. She has the baby on American soil, and by the 14th Amendment makes the argument, my child is an American citizen. So you find out mom and dad are here illegally. The child is technically an American citizen. What do? Do you allow mom and dad to stay here who came across illegally? They broke our laws. Or do you take door number 2? You send mom and dad home. Well, I guess you send all 3 of them home. But you've now just deported an American citizen. And that doesn't look very good on the government. So you allow them to stay. Do you send them all home, or do you split them up? Well, clearly, option number 3 should not be the best option there. You should not split up a newborn from his mom and dad. But you have a really tough decision to make. And these are the kind of real-life situations that our president is dealing with and our congressmen are dealing with, trying to figure out how do we handle these type of situations. So jus soli means that you are born on American territory, therefore you are an American citizen. Some of my students in the past have been military kids, and they were born over in Germany, they were born in Japan, they were born in France or Australia, but they're born on an American base. It's technically not American territory. So how do they become American citizens? Well, because of this option here. It is called jus sanguinis. Sanguinis is the Latin term for blood. It means that you are born of blood. You have a blood right to American citizenship. And so if mom and dad are American citizens, you have American parents, no matter where you are born in this world, you are automatically an American citizen. You could be born in the jungles of Congo, and if mom and dad are American citizens, you automatically have that citizenship. It's called birthright citizenship due to the fact that you have blood of American parents. Now, that only extends to your immediate parents. That does not extend any further. So you can't claim that grandpa and grandma were American citizens, and so therefore you should be an American citizen. It stops off at 1 generation. So let's just say that you were not born here. We have a number of students that come to the United States, they learn American government, but they were not born here and they want to know, how do I become an American citizen? It is through the process of naturalization. So it is called naturalized citizenship. There are a few key aspects to this process. First of all, you must meet age requirements. I don't know off the top of my head exactly what those are. You have to be here for a certain period of time before you are allowed to go through this process. And you also have to meet certain moral requirements. You have to be willing to uphold our laws. You also have to renounce the citizenship of your original country. That seems a little bit harsh. And I wonder why they would encourage you to do that, or why they would require you to do that. There are apply for dual citizenship and keep your citizenship back home and have your own. But most of the time you have to renounce your citizenship, pledging your one and only citizenship to the United States. And you can brainstorm a little bit, think about why that would be so important. Let me jump back here and get this back online. The last step in becoming an American citizen is that you have to pass a language test, an English proficiency test. So you have to demonstrate that you have the ability to communicate in our predominant language. I would not be shocked to see that one changed in the near future. But for right now, that's where that is. You have to have basic conversational English to be able to pass this test. The other part of the test is a citizenship test, in which you would have to answer a series of questions about American government and American history. We want people who have studied our culture and studied who we are, where we have come from, and how we got here. We want them to be part of that because there's a unique identity as an American. America is a melting pot. It has so many different cultures blended together, but that's part of what makes us unique. And so understanding the fact that we're not necessarily going to require that you become part of the American culture, but we want you to have an information about it. We want you to be well understood in some of our history and culture. So when we look at the requirements for voting, we said first qualification was citizenship. Second qualification is a residence requirement. You must be a legal resident of the state in which you want to vote. You are not allowed to vote in multiple states legally. Some people have tried, some people do, but legally you must vote in the state in which you reside. Most of the states require that you live there for a certain period of time. And they will have a 30-day requirement or 60-day. Some have had as long as a 6-month requirement. You have to live there before they allow you to vote. But states get to decide that. And that was essentially trying to prevent people from voting and impacting multiple states and impacting multiple elections. It also prevents states that are considered to be swing states or really close race states from importing people from across the border. So the state of Ohio tends to be a pretty big swing state that can go either Democrat or Republican. Well, if Ohio knows that Indiana is going to go one direction, let's say it's going to go Republican, they might start funneling voters over into Ohio across the border and vote a lot of Republicans in Ohio to try to swing that state their direction. So we want to prevent this from happening by requiring people to live there a minimum period of time before we let them vote. It also allows you to know the local issues. We want people to be informed voters. We want people to know who they're voting for, especially on those local elections. And so that is one of the other primary reasons why we would do that. And it generally requires the intention for this relocation to be permanent, that you're not just going to live there for 30 days in order to vote and then you're going to move back to your other state. It also prevents people from being on an extended vacation and claiming that as their home state. So it requires that you have the intention of being there permanently in order to vote, in order to avoid all those things. In 1970, Congress prohibited residency requirements for longer than 30 days in a presidential election. Now, that did go over a little bit differently in certain states. Some states had already done that. Other states wanted longer. But I believe that that still is the case as far as I know. Most states do require that residency requirement of 30 days, and some can be a little bit less, but you cannot generally have it longer than that. Now, the third requirement here is age. So we said there's citizenship, there's residence, the third one is age. 21 was the accepted age for a long, long time. But states had the opportunity to bring that age below 21, and there were 4 states that had allowed people under the age of 21 to vote. Georgia started this in 1943. Kentucky followed. Then we have Alaska and Hawaii. When they entered into the Union, their voting age was set at 19 and 20, respectively. Now, I'm not going to ask you to know exactly which states and what their voting age was, but I want you to see the trend here, that there were states that were beginning this process before we get to the 26th Amendment. We've already studied this. We know the 26th Amendment brought the age down to 18, but here's the sad part about that. This is the lowest voting demographic. Of all the age groups that if we were to look at them, 38% of those who are eligible between the ages of 18 and 20 come out to vote. At least that was in 2012 from when I pulled the statistic. So that to me has to change. And I believe in 2016, I believe that did go up a little bit, but a lot of it is not really understanding the process, maybe not being informed, or maybe not caring. And I hope that's not any of you. If you are 17, but you will be 18 by the time the election comes in November, you are generally allowed to vote in the primary in the spring, but that is up to the state to decide. If you're in the state of Indiana, I know that they allow that to happen, so 17-year-olds may vote in the primary coming up in the spring. So in addition to those 3 requirements here, the question often comes, well, how do we get registered, or why do we have to register to vote? Can't we just show up on election day? It ultimately depends on the state. Some states allow you to register on the day of the election. Others require a minimum of 30 days. Indiana requires 30 days to be registered before the election. So it is important to know what day is election day and when is my last day to register. If you show up and you're not registered, then you can vote on a provisional ballot, but you're not going to be able to vote with everybody else at the normal voting booth. You're going to have to do that a little bit differently. The intent of this is to prevent voter fraud, to prevent people from crossing the border, prevent people from voting in multiple places, multiple locations. There has been a push toward a voter ID law, but so far that has not been the case nationwide. There are some states that do require that. So as I mentioned, 20 to 30 days prior to the election, you need to be registered to vote. This voter database does get updated, but it takes time. And so they do purge through those voters every few years, and they take out the voters that have moved away or that have died or no longer voting. And I think in the state of Indiana, I think it's 7 years, but I'm not entirely sure, where they will remove you from the voter registry if you have not shown up for an election. And so that does happen if you sit out a number of elections, you think you're registered to vote, they will eventually pull you out because they think maybe you moved away, maybe you died and they didn't know about it. And so that can be very difficult. So they do that for death relocation, and it proves to be a very difficult job to get that accurate because it's very hard to track everybody within the precinct. Many poll books, many of the databases are going to be inaccurate because people don't update their voter registration as often as they should. And so they show up to vote on a particular day and realize that something's inaccurate, and it can cause some headaches. So make sure that you keep your voter registration updated. Make sure you register to vote. We'll walk through that in class. And so if you missed class and you did not see how to register to vote, please come see me, and I will talk to you about the process of getting registered to vote.